very different from advancing in a small company. It can be very, very rewarding, of course, but it's culturally and functionally different from how you would approach it in smaller companies. So SK, our speaker this evening, highly distinguished, 28-year veteran of Lockheed. He started as an engineer and basically created his own career. And that's really why he brings a tremendous amount of insight. He's also a well sought after speaker on matters of advancement, especially for minorities in corporate America. So he is a charter member of Plaza Silicon Valley and a fellow colleague. So with that, let me just welcome SK. Thank you very much.
Namaste. Thank you. I don't know about you all, but I forgot to do Namaste for decades. I came to this country and wanted to be an American. Didn't want to be East Indian, didn't want to be South Asia, I wanted to be an American. And over the years I discovered that it was not, I need to turn this on, right?
Thanks. Okay. I discovered it wasn't a question of what I wanted to be, but what I was seen as. The perception isn't what you would like the people to see you at, but how they see you. And like it or not, I look an Indian, or South Asian, or Asian, whatever you call it, and I speak like an Indian. So how many of you had an accent before you came to this country? See, I love to tell everyone, I did not have an accent till I came to this country. Back in India, everybody talks like me. So I only got an accent when I came here. It was not how I spoke, but how people listened. So it's not my problem if you have trouble understanding me, not this crowd. But. So for a long time, I was focused on my career. Yeah, once I finished college, I was practically broke, and worked my way trying to build savings, etc., etc. Some of you, can relate to that very well. And so I was focused on getting to a point where I would have a safety net for my family, etc. Could send my kids to good school. I used to tell my wife, I'll provide the basics. You need to save, do something to provide the college fees for the kids. We had 2 kids, and she did. She did her fair share. And over the years, I became a vice president at Lockheed in Denver, and after a couple of years there, I came transferred to Sunnyvale. And I used to be in Sunnyvale. I left 6 years earlier. And when I came back, people walked up to me and said, congratulations, one of us made it. First time someone said that, I didn't know what they meant. Second time, I'm beginning, I'm not an idiot, so I'm beginning to pick up a theme here that there is something going on. So I go to my buddy who's a vice president of HR and say, so what's going on? Why am I hearing this theme that congratulations, one of us made it? He said, have you looked around yourself? What do you mean? He said, how many Asian vice presidents do you see? I was the only one. When I left here 6 years earlier, there were a division president, there was a company president, there were 2 vice presidents, I was one of the 3 directors who were here. When I came back, I was the only vice president. In 6 years, it had changed a lot. And so I realized, whether I liked it or not, I was a role model for the company, for the people for the Asians in the company. And I started looking at data and discovered that, and I'm not going to use actual numbers because it's still sensitive, the percentage of managers at Lockheed was only 20% of the percentage of the Asian American population. That gap was a little too much for me to walk away from. I walked my life well believed in fair and reasonable, and that gap to me was unfair and unreasonable. And so over the years I started working on how do I help each Asian reach his or her potential. And I did a lot of work within Lockheed Martin, and since I've retired 2.5 years back, I've worked with an organization called Ascend. Ascend is another nonprofit, but it is across all Asians. And it is primarily finance related, but it has become huge in the last 5-6 years. It's funded by the major 4 accounting firms. And we just had the annual forum, annual meeting in Anaheim, and there were 1,800 people for 3 days. So it has grown to be a pretty large Asian American. So they do a lot of things, and I want to talk about two things. One, we teach something called Executive Insight Series, and that's a 2-day course. We teach 5 modules. So what you're going to hear today is a 1-hour summary of the 2-day course. And I'm not going to use any of their material because their material is copyright. So I worked this weekend to make my own material, which has no relationship to their material. And the other thing they do is they have been working at the executive level, and they have a course at Stanford called Advanced Leadership Program for Asians Only. They don't say only in their program title, it's an executive course. The only university that I know of that has created a program for one specific race. It's open to everybody, but so far no one but Asian has come there. We did the 4th year at end of July, beginning of August this year. We had 40 people from 26 different countries. So we have had about 140 people go through it, and it's geared at senior vice president, senior directors, vice presidents at that level. So we are doing a lot of the stuff. There's one course that we started with Chicago, University of Chicago, Booth School, called Emerging Market Leaders. That's going to roll out next year. And that's not exclusive to Asians, but it is geared towards Asia. Asia is one of the major emerging markets, so it's geared towards that. And we work with the schools and facilitate, etc. So anyway, that's, so if you guys are really serious about learning how to move up in corporate America, large corporate America, so think about attending one of those 2-day seminars, 2-day workshops, so that you can get an idea of a little more hands-on than what you will hear today. There you go. So I don't know who you are. So let's give me an idea about who you are from your company's revenue. So how many of you work for a company that has no revenue? The first question, how many of you have frozen shoulders? Any of you have frozen shoulders? No. Okay, so I want to see everyone raise their hand to show me that they don't have frozen shoulders. Thank you. Because we're going to do all of this. But this is how we're going to interact, and I'm going to find out what matters to you all and what doesn't. So how many of you work for a company that's revenue is less than $500,000 a year? Okay. How many of you work for a company that has revenue of about $2 million a year? Okay. $1 billion. $5 billion. $10 billion. $30 billion. Okay, good. So we have a variety of everybody. So just to give you an idea, the Fortune 500, actually Fortune 100, Fortune 100 starts at 30 billion and above. Fortune 500 starts at about 10 billion and above. Fortune 100 starts at 1,000 starts at 1.8 billion and above. We are also rolling out an initiative at Ascend for corporate executives for the Fortune, corporate board members for the Fortune 500 companies. And we just are working on the press release this week. So, okay, then the other thing I want to understand is at what level of your career are you all? So if there were 10 steps in your 10 levels in your organization, CEO, chairman being the highest level, and intern being the lowest level, how many of you are at 0 to 1? No, 1 to 2. This is no 0, sorry. Interns are the closest to it comes to 0. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. So again, we have a breadth of everything, which will give us a good flavor of all different levels of experience in the room and all different levels of companies that we have here. So who am I? I'm a crazy person who has taken advantage of opportunities over my life and made strange decisions over the years. Back in '68, when I was applying for engineering colleges, IIT graduates were getting 450 rupees a month. And there was a college called Marine Engineering College in Calcutta where you graduated and got 750 rupees a month and got to wear a sexy white uniform with shorts and everything, and you got paid to see the world. So fought with my dad, gave up IIT Kanpur and moved to Marine Engineering College and regretted that for a long time. But I stayed at sea for 8 years, then my daughter was born and there was no way I was going to basically be sailing for 8 to 9 months a year and have her, at home. So they joined me on the ship in Khurramshahr, Iran on her first birthday, and we sailed to north of Spain and came over to the States for a vacation and decided to stay. So I went to school at University of Michigan and got my second degree in 9 months and then became a naval arc. Went from Marine Engineering to naval arc. A couple of years later, Lockheed heard what I was doing with the Navy back in DC, and they came out to look at that, and then they made me an offer, and the company said, yes, go, it will be a good experience for you. So I went to Lockheed and became a shipbuilder. So I built ships for 5 years, and then Lockheed decided to get out of shipbuilding, and I was offered the opportunity to move to Sunnyvale and became a missile builder. So I built missiles, I built spacecrafts, and I also, my claim to fame is a stealth ship called Sea Shadow. How many of you have seen the movie Tomorrow Never Dies? The James Bond movie. There's a plump guy like me there with a salt and pepper beard. He's a computer jock for the bad guy. And at the end, the bad guy shoots him. If you remember what his name is, it's Gupta. That's my 5 seconds claim to fame. My customer was a consultant on the movie and based on, and he asked that some character be named, and unfortunately decided to name the bad guy would get shot. It was my claim. And then during that time I started moving up in my career and got an opportunity to do a special assignment for the division president on it was called comparative action plan to make us more competitive, but really we landed up doing process improvement. And I did that at the division level, then they liked what I was doing, asked me to do it at the company level, and after 2 years, corporate heard what I was doing, and corporation said, we want you to do this at the corporate level. So I went to Bethesda, Maryland, moved for 4 years, and did that for 4 years at corporate, and then I said, I'd really like to get back to hardware. And I worked with everybody and managed to get back to Denver as the Vice President for Operations for Entire Space Systems, and that's what I did the last 10 years. So that's who I am. During my time in Bethesda, I worked as a director. I worked for a very, I used to say he had stature, the gentleman that I worked for. He was a corporate vice president at Lockheed Martin, and when he spoke, everybody listened. So after about a year of working for him, I was having a career conversation. So he said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I'd like to be line vice president as opposed to a staff vice president. I want to be line vice president. He was a staff vice president, but he had been a line vice president before. And he basically looked straight at me and said, you'll never be one in this corporation. And I said, why not? And he says, you're not an alpha male. So I did my typical Indian thing, thank you so much, etc., etc. And thought about it for 3 days, and then I went back to him. I said, Jack, if I'm not an alpha male, what am I? He had a PhD from Purdue, and he's a pretty smart guy. And he thinks about it, and he says, you are a highly competent beta male. Have you ever heard that term? I think that describes most Asians. We are not the American alpha males, we are the highly competent beta males. So what do I do? I went to go, there's a book out, had just come out on alpha males. I go buy that book. I have an executive coach and I work with her and come up with a few things that would help me close the gap. process improvement, you're always looking to figure out what the gap is and how to close the gap. And I came up with 3 things that I had to learn. Rule number 1 that I had to learn, the only person in charge of my career was me. Not my mom, not HR, not my boss, only me. But what have you all taught? Work hard, work smart. If it is meant to be, it will be. It is kismet, karma, fate. How many of you got taught that when you were growing up? I mean, that's our culture. That's what our parents were taught. That's what they teach us. That's what we teach our kids. Rule number 2 I had to learn was the best way of making sure you don't get something is by not asking for it. And the analogy I use is if you're back in India or Asia, anywhere, and somebody shows up at your door at lunchtime, you invite them to join you. Common courtesy, right? But they also are required to say no. It's okay. I just ate and came, or something like that. But the culture is such that you know that they will say no at least twice, if not thrice. So you ask them 3 or 4 times. And finally they say, yes, sure. Here when my boss said, SK, I've got a special assignment for you with the vice president, he's looking for someone to work on this project. I was like, sure, it's me and not Jack or Mary or John. Yeah, Mary might be good, let me go talk to her. So wait, I just need polite. So I had to learn that, if I want something, I had to go ask for it as opposed to waiting to be asked. So one of the things, the title of my thing is Speak, Ask and Raise Your Hand. So we are taught not to speak up. We are taught not to ask for things, but wait to be asked. And we are taught not to raise your hand. There's actually been a training session at Harvard Business School for women, where they taught the women to raise their hand because women were being very, very hesitant in raising. They did a study. So I've got a lot of stories, so guys, so bear with me. They did a study in school in the 6th grades here, and they looked around and they said, at what percentage level do the white boys, who are all white in this class, Caucasians, at what confidence level do they raise their hand and say, yes, now ask me the question? What do you think?
100.
The boys? 50%. If they thought they were 50-50 right, they raised their hand. What about girls? They were somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. What about Asians? We need to be 100% right before we raise our hand. Right? So part of it is we have to learn, to speak up, ask, and raise your hand. The third rule I had to learn was the pull is stronger than push, but nobody pulls somebody who's not pushing themselves. So you have to push yourself. But what are we taught? Don't be the nail that's coming out of the plank, you'll get hammered down. The loudest bird gets shot first. Don't be pushy, that's rude. Can you all relate to that? That's what we are taught. So part of our challenge is the cultural upbringing that we all have had, which doesn't work in the American corporate environment. So we need to figure out what is it that we need to do different. So we don't need to change ourselves, but we need to overcome some of the things that we've been taught. You have to be true to yourself. And the last one basically is exceed expectations. If you're doing your job in the company, you're just being paid to do your job. You got to exceed expectations. You got to figure out how they say, wow, I didn't think you would get done in 7 days. I thought it'd take you a month to get this done. That's what part of my learning was. The question for you all is, what are the 3 rules that you have to learn? These are my rules for me. Each of you will have different rules that you have to learn to overcome your upbringing, your parents' guidance, grandmother's teachings. You got to think about what is it that is hampering you from doing it. Okay, so I would like you all to take a few minutes and meet your neighbors on the table, shake their hand, introduce yourselves, and talk about one thing which, if you changed, your career would get on a fast track in your corporation. Can you do that? And remember, no BMW. which stands for no bitching, moaning, whining. So you can't be bitching, moaning, whining. You have to think of positively one thing that if you did differently, your career will get on the fast track. Okay, so let's take a few minutes to do that.
I think the biggest thing probably that I could I'm an engineer. Right now I'm in technical marketing. And prior to that I was always in probably just speaking up and speaking up. So I am actually full-time here at Tyson Online. Prior to that, I did PR consulting for startups. I've dabbled in some right now working in mobile resource management application for particular construction companies. Job sites. My problem, I think, would be just being more risk-taking. I'm afraid to really go out there and talk to customers and feel like, to be shut down and say, we don't need this product. This isn't, the market isn't ready for it. I'm afraid to hear that. I think I needed, like they always say, get out of the office more and really test the product, theorizing what could go wrong in my head. Do something. Exactly. I feel like I'm doing a bunch of small things, but I'm not really making those big incremental changes because I'm afraid to hear that this isn't and I think that's my main problem. That's why I'm not into some of my ideas. And yeah, I mean, we're definitely moving forward now, and we're kind of bursting that bubble. But I wish I had known that sooner than later, and probably would have more successes. So my background is right now I run my I wish I could say that. A lot of people
Okay, wrap up in about a minute.
First thing I see like 1 year back. Don't know. Companies don't see it. Okay. So yeah. I actually regret not having that next. I could have always come back. Yeah. But mine was challenges. So that's the in a big company you tend to just focus on.
Okay, you guys ready to share with the rest?
Yeah. Never been in corporate, but I would imagine. I'm not.
Okay, can someone shout out one that from that table?
The one I had was I don't socialize with management. People. How about you?
I'm going to label that as relationship building. This table?
Learn new technologies.
You said your company is hiring? Yeah. All right. What do you know about? What kind of things? How will you get a card from you also later?
I think the one we had here, which I think resonated, was just in terms of promoting yourself.
Would you call that salesmanship?
Along those same lines, I think what the example she was giving was, if you do great work, how do you, in the right fashion or in the right mechanism, call out that you have performed something or done something extraordinary.
She didn't get the lecture from her mom saying, don't boast about yourself.
Right, correct.
Yeah, what was the phrase? Apne muh miya mittu. Can someone translate that for me?
Yeah.
Blow your trumpet. Assertiveness.
There's a fine line between assertiveness and aggressiveness, right?
It's a lot of this.
Ms. Table?
Frank but polite.
And assertive.
Managing the balls, understanding the balls, helping him succeed.
I had a job where I really didn't have a job title, so people used to say, what's your job? I said, it's my job to make my boss look good. And then one day he throws a temper tantrum and says, you keep implying that I can't look good without your help. I said, no, the problem is you haven't given me a title. So that night I had a title. That too.
Taking risk.
Oh, but the Asians are not risk takers.
Not fearing failure and making prompt decisions.
I'm just going to say deal with failure. Failure is okay. How's that?
We came up with two things. One is confrontation, constructive confrontation, and the other one was being able to show tangible results in a short time.
Hopefully you guys can read my handwriting. Did I miss any table? Does anybody have the urge to call out something that they have? I'm like that. If I have an urge to speak, I speak. So does anybody have urge to share one that we didn't miss?
Yeah, I started my career in Texas. My one big regret is not learning to speak football and baseball. Well, in 1970.
We didn't discuss this, but I think it's good to have a real mentor as opposed to artificial.
Be clairvoyant.
But last but not least is there's always an option for TIE, there is fostering entrepreneurship, right? So looking at alternatives.
So one of the, when Venk and I were talking about this class, one of the things we talked about was the difference between an entrepreneur organization and a large corporation. In entrepreneurial organizations, we focus a lot on networking. I mean, the people who work, they focus a lot on networking, not just in the existing company, but the next one, or the one that, is doing something different, similar, bigger company, because the idea is to either move or make connections or, something, because that is very, very important in an entrepreneurial environment. In a large corporation where people work for 20, 30, 40 years, it's different. You really, I was one of the really outside the corporation, really didn't have much of a network. The corporation had 130,000 people. That's a large enough network for me to, work with, as opposed to having to step outside to create a new network. And what do I need a new network for, other than to help my career, help my organization, etc. So that's one of the things that, we talked about, the difference between a large corporation and entrepreneurial corporation. So with given all this stuff, we can talk about any of them for days. What do you want to talk about? And I'll let you all decide what you want to talk about. I do want to talk about the first one. But other than that, I'm game with anything. So, go ahead.
Politics.
Okay? Okay? Okay?
Managing change.
Don't talk about everything. All right, so we'll go through it and we'll, So here's the famous line. I used to speak a lot, both in my role as the company VP of Operation as well as the founding member of an organization called CAL, Council for Asian American Leaders. And I used to travel across the country and, have a lot of sessions, this big, larger, smaller, etc. One of the things I discovered is Asian, and I'm generalizing here, so I apologize for that, but the large group so bear with me, okay? Asians are not good at asking questions in public. I would go to a meeting, I'd have a lot of Q&A, and at the end of it, all the Asians would get together and, around me and ask questions, one-on-one. That's our culture. We prefer one-on-one versus a public question. Standing up in public and, for multiple reasons, we don't want to embarrass the speaker, we don't want to stand up and say something that may not be, smart, etc., etc. But that is one of the quickest way of getting yourself recognized in a corporation outside your immediate organization. And one of the things I noticed is if an Indian is speaking, and I'm again exaggerating here, there'll be an Indian in the audience who will want to give me a lecture. So part of what I want you all to practice today is asking questions as a well thought out lesson. So, we got another hour here. So in an hour, feel free to raise questions, and if it doesn't work here, that's fine. Think about doing it in your comfortable environment, think about doing it with your wife, with your kids, etc. But think about how to ask a question that is not BMW, is not bitching, moaning, whining about what HR did to you 3 weeks back, or etc., or what your boss did, etc. But it is related to the subject of the speaker, and it is looking for the speaker to shed some light on that question. People are not here to listen to you expounding a theory. If you want to do that, you should be a speaker. So think about, good example, when you see TV shows, I know a lot of you watch, like my wife, the Indian drama, etc., etc. But take the time sometime to watch a Q&A session with some politician, some fireside chat, etc. Think of the way they ask questions and the kind of question they ask. That's an art. They will ask a short question, but a very insightful question to dig out some story from the other person that they may not have thought of telling. So that's the kind of question I would like you all to practice speaking in public. Not what your boss, did on your last rating, etc., etc. That's not the type of question you like to hear in an audience. But part of it is raise your hand. So who had the question just now? Thank you.
The first bullet point. So that's an area where I find myself not in the bright spot. So I know some sports, but those are not the popular sports here. So how do I develop that skill?
How long is your commute?
My commute is 15 minutes.
What do you listen to while you drive?
News,
Okay, what kind of news?
KLIV,
I don't know that.
NPR.
NPR? Okay, yeah. So think of changing the station to, I don't know the names, 740, 680, the ABC, etc., CBS, etc. station, because they cover the local sports. NPR is not very good at covering local sports. So if you want to get comfortable, you better know whether Seahawks beat the hell out of the 49ers or not last weekend. Because they're going to talk about it at work.
10:50 a.m.
10:50 is good.
Yeah, so there are no shortage of stations like that, so good question. So think about practicing, taking the time that you're driving to enhance a skill that you identify that I need to work. Because you're locked in your car for 15 minutes, right?
You can comment on, I normally what do is in such conversations, I just ask questions like, okay, so what does it mean, or that kind of stuff, instead of contributing anything. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that is a good strategy. but-
It's not a bad strategy, but you've got to get comfortable with one sport. It doesn't have to be every sport. But at the same time, if you're in Texas and Dallas Cowboys lost to Redskins, you better know that when you go to work. Because everyone's going to be mourning. Especially if the quarterback got distracted by his girlfriend. You guys are not laughing, you don't know that story. Never mind. There was a hat back there.
So, about your ability to ask questions, you said something about Asians that they want to be 100% right before, and that happens with me because you said something about asking insightful questions, so my mind's like always checking my questions, like is it really insightful or am I actually going to embarrass myself? So that it's sort of conflicting, at one point you want to be asking insightful questions, but that, like, not always have very insightful questions to ask.
So I'm at a meeting in Bethesda, and my CEO chairman is speaking, and he's taking, question answers. So I write down a question, show it to my buddy who's the finance controller, and he said, okay. So I just did a quick check with him and had a question to ask. I also had a reputation, a Lockheed, of asking weird questions. Another time as CEO, I asked him, I said, the last CEO took 18 months to replace all his direct reports. You've been in the job for 12 months, how are you doing? I mean,
Now I'll never ask that question.
he did a great job of saying, I have a great staff, I don't need to replace anyone, etc., etc. But that's the only SK can ask that kind of question to live. So that was my style. I have a corny sense of humor, and I enjoy it. Yeah, good.
So, we are on topic of asking questions. If you see Asians, they ask a lot of questions to build relationships. So I want to go to your first point, that can we use this as skill to build relationships?
Yes, but remember, when I talk about art of asking questions, I'm talking about a large gathering like this, or bigger gathering. So that's not where you want to build relationship. That's where you want to stand up and be seen as somebody who has a smart question to ask. And if someone says, that's a stupid question, no one would say that, no speaker would say that. But think about the question to ask. Get comfortable asking questions in a comfortable environment. You don't want to do that the first time, when you're seeing a CEO's meeting, etc. You want to do that, in an office, your colleagues, your peers, your one boss or something in that environment. But practice.
So differentiating between a smart question and a smart Alec question, how would you be sure that, there is a tendency to ask a question where you either know the answer or you hope that he knows the answer.
The smart thing is to never ask a question where the speaker does not know the answer. If you're trying to make the speaker look bad by asking a question that he or she may not know about, you're not helping yourself. So you should always ensure that you ask the speaker the question. So like my question for that day, which I checked off with the controller, was, how does Lockheed decide when to buy back its stock in the market? The chairman knew that answer. He wasn't going to share that answer with us. Because then we would all know when to exercise options. But he dealt with it. It was a question that was of answer would have been interest to everybody in the room. Now, my question about when you're going to fire all your things, that was a smart Alec question that I shouldn't have asked. So that's the fine line we got to draw.
What are the other ways of getting the art of asking questions? Like one you said, listen to the fireside chat. So what are the other ways?
Speak a little louder, project, think I'm in the next room.
So I like the one which you said that to build the art of asking question, you need to, listen to the fire chat and the way people are asking. So are there any other ways, to get that skill? I mean, with your experience.
There are just two ways: learn from others and practice. And every skill that we have listed here is the same thing. You have to observe others who are doing those things right. So I'm going to keep moving here, so I'm going to talk about executive presence. So I told you I had an executive coach at Bethesda who when I was a director, so one of her feedback was you need to develop your executive presence. And I said, oh my God, what is that? What does that mean? So I thought in my mind, who do I know who has the best executive presence? And I thought of this vice president who was head of our Palo Alto labs, and I called him up. I said, Aram, I need to develop my executive presence, so would you be my mentor? He said, it would be a pleasure to be a mentor because we already had a relationship, etc. And I started listening to him, and so one of his recommendations was, within the first 10 minutes of a large meeting, where you have peers, bosses, etc., ask a question that is relevant, insightful, and has not been asked. But if you are going to sit there for the 2-hour meeting or something and not ask a question, which is very typical of Asians in large corporations, you're going to be seen as not interested. You're going to be seen as he doesn't know or she doesn't know what we're talking about. You say, what's the value of that person in this meeting? So if you are in a meeting, you have to contribute, either with a smart answer or with a smart question. So there is no magic to it other than to observe people who are doing it and follow. One of the things I learned when I was much younger, I read a book called Dress for Success. Any of you ever heard of the book? I'm dating myself, so And one of the things I learned from that was you do not dress for what your peers wear, you dress for what the job you want. So I remember telling my wife that, honey, you need to iron my shirts and give them to laundry now. I can't just take out from the dryer and hang it and wear it. And she was mad at me. We didn't have the money to go, give to laundry, but, so she had to iron it, but it was a good investment. Sorry, you've been waiting to ask a question.
I've been doing management consulting, and for my job, I had to go many years in Dubai and Middle East area, which made me work a lot more with people like us and Asians. And what I want to say, it's not a question but a comment, and from observation and practice, that most of the time when I was in meetings and a question would come, it was always insightful. It was always full of wisdom. And we all would sit down and really listen and analyze what they said, because I think by nature our cultures are so intuitive, so full of wisdom, that we just bring that. And we just have to trust that because we feel the pulse of the organization, we do have relevance and not be afraid to ask that question.
Very valid. The difference is that we are in a different environment here. And so it takes a little bit of courage to speak up. But that's the risk that we all have to learn to do. So let's move on to I'm keeping an eye on the watch so I can get you guys out of here in time. Relationship building. We had that somebody here showed up, relationship building. Who was that? What do you mean by that? Relationship building with whom?
Your people above you, superior, or higher up.
Is that important?
Actually, what you might want to say is relationship building with the people who can help you to achieve what you want.
So one of the courses that I teach is called Managing Up. And part of what we teach is, it is not your boss that you need to manage, and we had one of those things about managing your boss, etc. It is your boss's boss. Who's going to give you your next promotion? Not your boss, you want his job or her job. You really want who's going to give you that job that your boss has today? Isn't that what you're aspiring for? So who's going to make that decision? So part of what you need to think about is that decision comes from a level higher or input of the peers of your boss. So that's where you need to think about building your relationship. And how do you make that relationship? We talk about mentoring. Somebody asked for mentoring. What's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? And a coach? Anybody? How many of you have a mentor? None of you have a mentor? That's it? If you want to build relationships, this is one of the easiest way. It is a very flattering thing to go to your boss's peer or your boss's peer, depending on your organizational hierarchy, and say, I'm looking for a mentor to help me with, improve my career or improve my skills. They are flattered. They would love to mentor people. I usually have room for people who say, I have 2 mentors, 3 mentors, etc. So I'm surprised, that is an easy thing to win. It's very easy to go and ask somebody, would you be my mentor? And mentor is not lifelong. Mentor is not forever. Mentor is you may have 3 or 4 mentors and one of them works better than others, and that's fine.
In a large organization, you go to your boss, and boss. That's not actually encouraged if they think that you are bypassing certain things, right? How do you kind of, even you said fear of boss, right? That means, in a large organization, they think that you're looking for a change or job change, right? Or looking for a different opportunity. How do you handle such situations? That your intention is to get a mentorship, not to get a job or something like that, right?
So part of it is you have to have relationships every day. You cannot suddenly walk up to your boss's boss and say, I'd like to talk to you. When you're in a meeting where he or she is already there, take the time to make small chat. Whether it's 49ers or, how are your kids doing this week, or, is your son gone to college yet or not, I know people who keep track of every customer's family member's, name, etc., etc. So you can't just suddenly show up. Like, one of the things I teach is called elevator speech. So you must, have, if you show up with your boss's boss in the elevator, it says, so how's it going this week? He says, fine, sir. You just lost a great opportunity.
Why? But why though? But
You have him for 45 seconds.
No, if the guy said, how is it going? He said, fine. So
Now, here's what I would do, okay?
No, but if that guy is not interested in digging more,
How do you do
the
that?
guy is actually doing really great. He is really very smart. He contributed to one of the greatest things in the group. And if that guy is not really figuring out how he has done it, does he really care for it?
That's where you need to think about. Do you really want to build a relationship or not? If you do, you need to.
Not that, the very smart people, very successful people who have done this and then they know what it needs to do.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting. Are we talking about relationship building? Or are we talking about something else?
He's talking about, trying to.
But he is stuck with him for 40 seconds anyway.
Right? So
You got 40 seconds and you lost the 40 seconds by saying fine. What I would do with Ajit Bethesda, I'm in the elevator with the CEO or CEO, and say, SK, how's it going? Because, they all knew who I was, even though I worked as a director and there was I worked for a vice president who reported to them. And I said, fantastic, so I had a great trip to Owego. Really changed some minds there. They said, yeah, do I need to know about it? No, you're fine. Some time I said, I had a great trip to Orlando, and Joe Cleveland was real great. Yeah, Joe's a good guy. So you got a good relationship with him? I'm working on it, sir. Now, next time you'll remember, I'll ask Joe what he thinks of SK. You've got 40 seconds. You can either use it or lose it. So, and part of what I teach is think about multiple different elevator speeches. There's one for your boss's boss, there's one for your boss's peer, one for the finance guy who controls all your budget. He really doesn't care about, and you're not going to sit down at home and write all this stuff. You can think about this as a 15-minute drive to work. If I run into a CFO and he asks me how are things going, what's my one-liner quick reply that gets a hook into him? So that's how you start relationship building. You can't just show up at the boss's door and he doesn't even know who you are and say, boss, I'm so and so, I need a mentor. That doesn't work. And that is frowned upon.
I think where he was going was once you start posing up with, say, the boss's peer, that may not be received very positively. That's not very, it's not easy to show up.
So you talk about politics now.
No. I'm talking about
So how many of you think politics is a bad thing? None of you think politics is bad. Great. Only 2 people think politics is bad. I think I heard this from somebody. If you do it well, it's called relationship building, because if you do it badly, it's called politics. And so you are totally right. If you're seen as posing up, you're not doing relationship building. You are doing politicking, and you're trying to do something that is not natural. But if you do it in your natural environment, if you're in a meeting and everyone gets there 5 minutes, 10 minutes early, go up to somebody, shake hands. Okay, back to my one earlier. You guys shook hands, right? When you introduce yourself around the table. How many shook hands like an Indian versus an American? How many shook hands like an Indian?
no idea what is India.
You don't even know what I'm talking about. Shake my hand. Now shake my hand. Which is it? Second one's American. If you are in America, you are in a large corporation, you are dealing with white men who are alpha males. My quote said, if you want to get along here, you better change your car. We're used to this. We're used to limp handshakes. But in a large American corporation full of Caucasians, you better learn how to shake hands firmly without getting your hands squeezed. I had a director who was like 6'4" and big guy. So he was my guy. I said, you have to practice. So every time he saw me, he put his hand out, and that was my practice.
At the same time, keep proper eye contact.
All that is maybe too much. If you can, I have never learned to do a good eye contact because we were taught to look at the lips, not at the eye. And that has never been a problem. But look, smile, open your face, be inviting. Okay, let's keep moving here. I'm going to skip this one, but I'll just talk about this very briefly. What separates... So I'm going to use an example of a large group of people who are hired into a company from Stanford. So let's say Google hires 6 people today from Stanford. One of them is likely to go become CEO, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. And my contention is the only reason she will get there versus the other 5 is because of the decisions she makes along her career. You don't agree or you
No,
agree?
right.
Yeah. So part of what your challenge is in a large corporation is how to make the right decision at the right time. And I have a very simple advice. No regrets. If you are going to walk away and think about it 2 years from now and say, I wish I had done that, you made a wrong decision. So when you have to make a decision, think about it hard and make it. When corporate asked me to move to Bethesda, my son was finishing his 10th grade, moving into junior year. No way in hell I'm going to move, Dad. Yeah, not a choice. It's the right thing to do for my career. You'll survive. And I've seen lots of people who basically said, no, there's no way I can move because my child's in this school, or it's got a very nice setting, etc. Well, that's a risk you're going to take. And that's a decision you're going to make. I would have never become a vice president if I hadn't moved to Bethesda. I would have been a staff person somewhere, doing something. So part of what you'll need to think about is how to make the right decision. I could show you a quick example. You're not going to do that. So I use this as a quick example of, everybody take time to think about answers to those. And the idea is, what numbers do you pick so that you're right?
0 infinity.
That's an easy cop-out answer. But you got to use some brains to get somewhere closer to that. But that's an easy answer. And these are the right answers. And most of us wouldn't have known these. I picked these out of random, data stuff that most of us would not know the answer. But that's the kind of stuff we do. Okay, Asians are not risk takers, right? How many of you agree with that? So why did you come to this country? If you're not a risk taker, why didn't you just stay back in India and work in your own, father's family business or, your cousin's office or something like that? So I would submit we are all risk takers. We take a different kind of risk. We need to do prudent risk taking. Smart risk taking, where you balance risk and reward. For the longest time, I was a low risk, medium reward person. Immigrant, trying to save money and all that kind of stuff, so I don't want to take high risk, I want to take low risk, but because of my hard work and smart application of my hard work, I could get medium returns. And then I was about 40 years old when my boss called me and said, in Sunnyvale at the company level, the company EVP called me and said, SK, I have this job for you, very high risk. But very high reward also if you can make it successful. I want it. As you realize it's high risk, I said, I'm 40 years old. If I don't take high risk now, when am I going to take it? And I took the high risk and I had trouble succeeding, but I managed to turn it around in a year's time and, moved on. So part of it is we need to think about what risks we want to take, when, etc. I used to joke that I was the most analyzed person at Lockheed Martin. One of the earliest psychologists who worked with me when I was still a senior staff engineer, they were trying to figure out, my boss was trying to figure out how come I never moved into management. I did great work, everybody liked what it as the direct manager, but not an HR coded manager, if you don't understand the difference. And this guy, went and talked to a whole bunch of my ex-bosses, etc., and basically came back and said, there's only one problem. You're too flip. You understand what that means? You're too flip. What's the word you used? Smart aleck. I would say what I thought was a funny thing at the wrong moment. Being a smart aleck, wise ass, that's a great feedback because I can control that. And I did, and I was one of the rare people at Lockheed who never became a manager, went straight from being a senior staff engineer to a director. So it was that one simple thing that I had to learn to control. So part of it is asking, so how many of you have an iPhone or a equivalent thing that has video camera on it? How many of you have used it on yourself? So it is a most powerful thing for you to build get your own feedback. There is no better critic than you for you. If your wife criticizes you, if your children criticize you, if your peers criticize you, you will defend yourself and argue with them. If you criticize yourself, there is no one to defend you. You can rationalize it, but you can't defend it. So my suggestion is when you are going to make a presentation somewhere or something, have somebody videotape you. Or practice before you go to presentation. So when I was a director, I said, it's time for me to go become a vice president. My boss had said he didn't want me. He had just inherited my one boss had left, the other one had taken over, and he didn't want me to go anywhere because I had all the corporate knowledge in my head. And so after a few months, I told my executive coach, I'm going to go see the COO and president and tell him I'm ready to, for a promotion. He said, great, what are you going to tell him? I'm going to tell him I'm ready for a promotion. And what do you think he's going to tell me? Long story short, I hadn't thought this through. So she made me practice on video my first 3 minutes with the CEO and president. Did it for 4 hours over a 10-day period. I mean, different times, she had the video camera and basically, and then she had me criticize myself. About a conversation, not about a presentation. You're in the CEO's, president's office, and he said, come on in, escape, now what? What is it you're going to say? So when it really happened, it was a breeze. I'd done it so many times already that I knew what my facial expression had to be, how my smile had to be, how my handshake had to be, what were the words that were going to come out of my mouth. Not in exact, I didn't memorize them, but, And when I left, it was to the president saying, I think you're ready to be vice president, I'm going to be a sponsor. What else can you ask? So what is your brand? Think about it. When I got to Sunnyvale was in pits. It was in a very sad condition compared to what I had left 6 years back. So I went and got this hat, and I was the new sheriff in town. When you walk around in California with a cowboy hat on, you are unique. And my line was very simple. I want each of you to tell me one thing you would change at Lockheed Martin to make this a better place. And we had a huge, area where people could see from all over that, SK is walking around in a cowboy hat. I have an idea, I'm going to go tell him. And I got so many good ideas from people because they could see me. And also I used to joke, I'm the only one who could be Indian and cowboy together. So what's your brand? If you don't have one, why not? What would you like your brand to be? Think about that. And when I talk about brand, what I'm saying is, we used to do selections as vice president, we used to decide who the next director for ABC job was going to be. But somebody has to basically say, well, that guy is not only hardworking, he knows this. What are they going to say about you in that meeting? And how are you going to make sure that they can say about it? Like one of the things I used to tell my guys is, I would love to be your champion, when people came, it didn't work directly for me, but I said, I'd love to be a champion in the meeting, but you need to give me data that is not negotiable, that you have done, you have achieved, you can bring to the table, that I can say, Sam can do so. But if you have a mentor or a sponsor who doesn't know what you have done, what you can do, what you have achieved, it's a useless relationship. Okay? So think about building your brand. I think we have a few more minutes. I'm going to keep this for the end. What else do you want to talk about in here? Risk taking. Every day you get on the freeway, you're taking a risk, right? That's a calculated risk. So that's what you have to do every day. So when you're in the meeting with your bosses, hanging around having a cup of coffee, that's the time you need to take a risk to build a relationship. That's a calculated risk that it's only 2 minutes. I don't need to have a 30-minute appointment with him or her. So that's part of what risk taking isn't about reaching for something that's so far away. calculated risk-taking, prudent risk-taking, taking one step at a time.
How about you change your role from building ships to building spaceships? So you are changing the role within your organization. So how can you make risk involved in that sense?
So what's the first thing I did? Went and bought a book on spacecraft. So that's what we built. And I'm a quick learner. You know, my reason for success is I use two words: learning agility. I was able to learn in a new job very quickly what the job was all about and be able to have a conversation about a spacecraft, its parts, who builds them, etc., etc. Why do we need something that goes at 5.8 kilometers per second versus 6.3 kilometers per second? That kind of conversation I could have. I was never going to be a spacecraft designer. If somebody wanted me to go, help build one or organize a manufacturing plant for that, not a problem. But part of it is learning how to do it. I'd never built a ship till I got to Seattle and started building ships. I never built a missile till I came here. I never built a spacecraft till I came back here. So I actually got to did rockets also in Denver. So part of it is what's the best resource. So when I became the vice president of operations, my boss didn't know me very well. He was the executive vice president of the corporation. So after a month, I got on his calendar and basically said, Al, here are the things that I'm planning to do. And I had a PowerPoint chart pack, about 14, 15 pages, and he went through them like this. And he turns it over and he said, SK, I have a dozen people who give me status. I don't need another person giving me status. I was a staff guy at that time. He says, you are costing me $1 million a year. He wasn't paying me $1 million, but that was the cost of everything that's, He said, if I don't get 10x return from you, I don't need you. What the hell do I do now? So I go find the controller and I said, how do I generate money? He's looking for $10 million, and I'm not in sales, so I've got to do it from the expense side. So he gave me some ideas. I got on the plane, went to corporate headquarters, went to the controller there and sat down and they said, oh, we have been waiting for someone to come talk to us about this. And they gave me a whole bunch of ideas of what to do and what space system needed to do to reduce their cost. And 2 months later, I pitched to the EVP, this is all the things I was going to do. He said, love it, I want you to pitch it to all the profit and P&L vice presidents. And I didn't know what to do. But there were enough people out there that I went to ask, and they said, happy to help you, we know what to do, we just need someone to be a mouthpiece and drive this. Within the first year, we saved $3 billion in the space system.
You talked to the fact that, with the right aspiration you said, because once you come from a different country, you make a good representation, you do that get done really well, relative to where we started, and we become contented. We don't set the goal, and we don't even think of ourselves as becoming maybe a CFO or a CEO or something like that. So how much of that is culture, and how much of that is more personal?
So I'm going to ask you a weird question, so hang in there. How many of you believe this country is racist? You truly, honestly believe that?
We have seen much more racism in India. So we all end up, this is a heaven.
All human beings are racist, right?
It's not about it's not about country, it's an individual.
Yeah. So part of our challenge is, so I'll give you some statistics. The immigration law in this country changed in 1964. Lyndon Johnson changed the law, okay? At that point, there were 600,000 Asians in this country, all Asians combined. Today, in 2012, July census projects we are 17 million people. So out of those 600,000 that were there, most of them on the coast. The people who are the bosses today, especially in larger corporations, are in their 50s, 60s. They didn't grow up with Asians. So part of that challenge, I'm not answering your question, but just triggered a thought here. Part of that challenge is they think of us Asians as foreigners because they didn't grow up with us, they didn't go to school with us. Now our kids are different, your guys' age is different. But for that generation who are the CEOs, CFOs, corporate board members, etc., who are making the big decision of who shall be CEO, CFO, for them we are still strangers, foreigners. And we need to figure out how to make them comfortable. Now back to your question of self-aspiration. I am a good example of take advantage of the opportunity. There is no way anyone could have defined a career like I did. It's all over the map. It was when I transferred here from Sunnyvale, I was a manager there, I transferred here as direct manager there. I transferred here, basically became a design specialist and worked my way up to staff engineer, senior staff engineer. I had no aspirations of becoming in management in a totally new industry. But when I was in the job for 6 months, a year, I'm comfortable with this, I can do that person's job. And for every promotion that I got, there were at least 10 that I was told I was not the right person. That did stop me from knocking on the door, putting in an application and saying, why not me? And it's only when I got to a level, I said, what's my next job? So aspiration is all personal comfort. It's, part of it is work-life balance. I had a in-house consulting team in Bethesda, and every one of them wanted to be vice president. So I had a couple of coaches come and talk to them about the life of a vice president. The sacrifices you have to make in a large corporation to be a vice president. You do not have your own time. I used to spend about 110 nights on average on the road. My evenings were called, 2 or 3 evenings every week were booked in some non-profit that I was on board of, or some charitable organization I was representing the company or to, etc., etc. My son, when he was 13 years old, his favorite song became Cats in the Cradle. I don't know if some of you know that song. It's about a son who wants to be just like his dad, and that dad doesn't have time for him, and then he grows up and then he doesn't have time for the dad. And I basically said, not happening, and change my lifestyle, change my thing to basically spend more time at home. But my kids used to say for years, Dad, you were never there for a soccer game, you were never there for our baseball game, etc. And when our daughter was getting married, 7 years now, both my kids were yanking my chain. And I said, look, both of you went to very expensive schools. And both of you graduated with no loans. So would you rather that I attended your soccer games and you had loans, or rather that I worked hard and you graduated with no loans? That was the last time they ever brought it up. But that's part of the sacrifices you've got to make. You cannot have, there is no such thing as perfect work-life balance. And you've got to define your own aspirations. What makes it comfortable for you? Not what somebody says you should be, etc. But what is it that you feel inside uncomfortable with? Other question?
This is a bullet about confrontation. It's not about handling confrontation or conflict.
So I have a theory. That we Asians are more comfortable doing fight or flight. I don't know about you all or your families, but so let me ask you, how many of you have seen your parents, your cousins, masis, whatever, having an argument with each other, and either they are fighting or they're walking away? Right? Most of us have grown up with that. That is what I believe is our challenge. I was at a training class in Bethesda. I'd gone from here, and there were these 2 guys from New Jersey, both vice presidents. They were going at each other all day long. I mean, yanking each other's chain all day long. And I'm sitting there, I'm getting uncomfortable. In the evening, they're having a social hour, they're best of buddies. That's the the stuff that we do not have the role models for as growing up. We are not good at confrontation. And we don't need to make it confrontation. We need to be able to sit with somebody and face the person and have a dialogue. Confrontation can easily become a fight or flight. But I want you all to think about how to face the confrontation. There is no shortage of SHs in this country, especially large corporations who are, alpha males. A year after I retired, my boss and I had my ex-boss that, we were having lunch, and she said, how about you come back and do some consulting? Why not? I said, I don't want to have anything to do with Mr. A, Mr. B, and Mr. C. And she started laughing. She said, yeah, I can see that. Because those were all three were kind of people that I had no desire to see the rest of my life. And any amount of money is not worth it. At this point of my life, I would have said differently, 20 years back, for a little bit of money, I'd have taken that, but now I'm fortunate that my wife and my lifestyle is such that we don't need to worry about it. So, you will have, especially if you work with alpha males, there will be confrontation. The question is how do you deal with it? And the best two tricks I will tell you is listen and smile. It confuses the hell out of them. Because they're looking for you to fight back. That's what they want. They want to basically, have an argument and beat you down and say, okay, it's like winning a football game. Don't give them the advantage. So these are the facts. And this is how I'm going to deal with it. And agree to disagree. We will not, our generation who came, our first generation immigrants, will have a tough time winning a confrontation with an alpha male. Because they grew up with that. They have 30, 40 years experience on that. We don't. So that one, just face it, smile it, listen calmly and go figure out how to deal with what they're trying to do.
I think everything you went through is absolutely an art form and it takes practice to perfect. Where artists have museums to validate their work and actors have awards to validate their work. At what point in time do you realize you're on the right track in your career? Are there any milestones? Are there any signs that to kind of signify that you're going in the right direction?
For me, it was very simple. Going home, did I make a difference today or not? As simple as that. And if I felt I made a difference, I was happy.
That's an example of an insightful question.
Yeah, very, very insightful. Good example. Yeah, very insightful.
And it works for time.
My brand.
And there is, I'll give you a personal example. We were in Seattle and I was making, I'm guessing about $45,000 a year. And I was doing the projections, 3 to 4% pay increase every year. And I was telling my wife, I said, honey, by the time we retire, I'll be making $100,000 a year. And she said, no way. That's what my aspiration was at that point. If I was, by the time I retired, I could make $100,000. I was 33 or 34 that time. Like, 36. Yeah, I would have been happy with that. But as you move on, as you grow older, your aspirations change, your milestones keep moving. So I wouldn't say, there was a guy I worked with, he supposedly, when he joined Lockheed, someone asked him, what do you want to be when you grow up? He said, I'm going to be an executive. He knew that the day he joined, he had just come out of college. I wasn't like that. If some of you are like that, great, but I think that's rare than the common.
You talk about executive coach or career coach. Can you talk about the role of career coaching in your?
Yeah, so there are 3 types of people that over the last 10 years have become more different than when we were growing up. We were growing up, it was more of a mentor was the only thing that we knew. And now over the years, now we try to define 3 different things: mentor, sponsor, and coach. And the difference between them is a mentor is somebody who sees it. This is my recommendation and definition. Mentor is somebody who sees you at work, who is not in your direct chain of command, and can give you advice and feedback on what you can do different to project yourself, to improve your image, etc., etc. Sponsor is somebody who is going to help make a career decision for you at the next level. And she knows some of the things that you have done. She doesn't know everything that you have done, but she knows some of the good things you have done and can speak up for you when they're looking for a candidate for the next post. A coach is somebody you can have anything, any dialogue with the person. And the coach will basically, so I had this executive coach I was telling you about, so I was sitting with her one time, and she said, you want to be vice president so bad, you'll become vice president of nothing. You're willing to become vice president of nothing. I was offended. I bit my tongue, I listened to her, I smiled at her, I said, the vice president of nothing, in my definition, is the vice president of diversity and inclusion. But if you gave me his job, in 3 months the job would be vice president of something. And she smiled and said, you're damn right. And that was the last thing, But that's the kind of conversation you can have with them. The coach can be internal or external. I've had both. Fortunately, I've never had to pay for it. The company paid for them. But a coach is somebody who can, they have a lot of tools. They're usually psychologists. They will evaluate your skill set, and they'll tell you what skill sets you need to work on and what you need to. So like one of my coaches has written a book, your biggest strength can be your biggest enemy or something like that. Your major strength can be your biggest weakness. And you don't realize that. That somebody says, this is your strength, but it's become a weakness now at this point in your career. So that's the difference between the three things. Does that make sense to you all? So one of the things I want you all to do is think about getting more mentors. You may not be able to get coaches, sponsors. It's hard to go seek out sponsors, basically seek you out versus you seeking out sponsors. But mentors you can seek out. Okay, so it's time to stand up. You guys have been sitting for too long, so let's stand up. I want you to take a partner, stand in front of the partner. And if you don't have a partner, just raise your hand and then find somebody else whose hand is raised. So find a partner, raise your hand.
Okay.
Everybody? Okay? Everyone's got a partner? Now I want you to observe the partner. Look at the partner, and there's mixed company, so women are always ladies, men will be gentlemen. So observe your partner for 30 seconds. Okay, now I want you to turn around with your back to your partner. And I want you to change back to partner. So you're not observing the partner, okay? So I want you to change 5 things physically on you. Change 5 things physically on you. Changing a smile to a frown doesn't count. You only have 30 seconds, hurry up. Physically, and you're back to your partner.
Find the difference.
Okay, clock is ticking, hurry up, hurry up. Okay, I see most people are ready to move on. Next step. So now I want to turn around and identify the 5 things your partner changed. Okay, when you're done, you can sit down. Okay, if you're not done, you can help the partner and sit down. Okay, now we're going to do the frozen shoulder test, okay? How many of you have frozen shoulders or not, okay? So how many of you had tough time thinking of 5 things to change? Okay, so look around the room. A lot of you had tough time thinking of 5 things to change. Why did you look around the room and look at others and what they were doing? Remember, if you copy from one person, it's plagiarism. If you copy from 5, it's research.
Best practice.
So, how many of you took something off your body? Just look around the room. How many of you added something to your body from outside? Just look around the room. You see the difference? That we already own and control, we are happy changing. But change from outside is not natural. Okay, so how many of you have not put back all 5 things where they were before you changed them? Not put back all 5. Not put back all 5. Few. Change is an unnatural human act. Everybody talks about change management, etc., but what this exercise I want you to do is change is an unnatural human act.
I get to deeper.
Okay?
Because all over we are surviving and we are changing, we are adapting. Because we are coming from the different countries. So
No debate. Human beings have to change. My point is, it is an unnatural human act. That's why the 5 things that you did changed, you put back most of them where they were. My point is, you guys listen to a whole bunch of ideas. Hopefully you got some nuggets in something, some story, something will stay in your mind. If it's 1 or 2 stories, that's great. You're not going to remember everything. But think about 1 or 2 things that you're going to want to change in your behavior, your style, your commitment, your interaction, relationship building, talking about sports, something you're going to have to change. But because it is not a natural human act, it is an unnatural act, you have to do it again and again and again till it becomes natural. If somebody wants to start wearing the watch on the right hand, they used to wear watch in left hand, it is going to take them, beat say 6 to 26 times before you get to that point. I used to wear glasses for 40 years. Then I got LASIK surgery. It took me about a year from getting up in the morning and reaching over to grab my glasses. But that's what I did for 40 years. Got up in the morning, grab my glasses. So anything that you decide you're going to do different, any one thing, I don't want you to think about changing 10 things, it's not going to happen. So think about changing 1 thing, 2 things, something. But if you don't change something, then you're wasted this evening that you're here. So think about changing something and then practice, practice, practice. Whether it's a handshake, whether it's a smile, whether it's the art of asking question, whatever. Okay, I'm done. Last minute for questions and then we'll wrap up in time.
So what exactly do you mean by executive presence? Because I was kind of struggling to understand because I get the word everywhere from.
Do you work in a large corporation?
Yeah.
Do you have any role models there that you can think of who basically walk in the room and everybody says, oh, Bob's here?
Not really. I don't see people in that way. I try to understand that how they're thinking, how they're solving the problem.
Executive presence is not about inside, it's about outside.
Okay.
Executive presence is how you project your image. It's about, dressing up like your boss's boss or dressing up like, like this golf course said. He said, my desire when I go on the court to play golf is to dress better than my caddy. Now, is that going to make him executive presence? No. But those are the small things that make a difference in executive presence. If you're going to show up with scuffed up shoes, you're not projecting a good image. So how many of you dressed up on your interview day in a tie and suit, and except for the ladies, you dressed up in different suits, but and went to work for the interview? How many of you went for an interview all dressed up? How many of you still do that dressing up every day at work? Why don't the rest of you do it? Every day is a job interview for the rest of your life.
Actually, in Bay Area, you're not supposed to. So basically you have to.
Yeah, you don't have to wear a suit and tie, but you still don't have to be scuffy. So there's this lady at work, and I worked with her for some time, and then she went off, and I met her after some time, and we were chatting. I said, I'm glad you removed the stud from your tongue. And she said, SK, I can kill you. So why? She said, why didn't you tell me that when I worked with you? She said, it took me 2 years to discover that that was distracting to people I was talking with. So that's part of, she was a manager at that time, so that's part of what you have to be conscious about, looking for feedback. What is it that I can do different? The best person to give you feedback are people who are watching you, observing your mentors especially. You had a question?
I guess I'm probably judging very quickly here, but since we don't have time, I just wanted to ask you. It looks like some of we are in tech industry, hardcore, we're all mostly engineers. Our environment seems to be very different from my limited understanding of the company, that corporate environment that you are describing for yourself. In our case, we can't dress well, and like he said, if I go cozy up with my boss's boss or his peers, it's not looked upon nicely. And we don't also grow that much, so there's no chance of growing easily in the organization.
I totally agree with you.
That you apply for this.
Remember, this whole thing was how to grow a career in a large corporation.
Right.
So this is totally large corporation career paths are, and what you have to do is totally different than in small companies and in.
Well, no, I work for a very large company.
So actually current last 6-7 years, the whole situation, at least here, I guess, has changed or was different, because I come from a corporation where you work. So I can relate to both sides, and it took me 2 years to understand that how US might have changed in this 5, 7, 6 years after recession.
So again, I want to add that stuff was definitely relevant. So one of the things that I found really helpful was that, like you said, imitate people who are successful. That is
Wait. I don't want to use the word imitate.
Well, yeah.
I want to use the role models. It is the fine line between what word you use. So like somebody said something and I changed it to clairvoyant. I do not want to put the word BS on the chart here. Because if I start doing that, I'm projecting a negative executive presence. So this is a conscious, all the time you have to be conscious about who you are, what is the image you're projecting. So when I say you got to be dressed up for an interview, you don't need to be dressed up for an interview in a tie and suit, etc., on every day. But you have to be dressed up like the job that you want in your company. So, somebody else?
We'll make that the last question, so.
Sounds good.
Since you mentioned about doing a lot of different things, it appears to me that in a large company, ideally they'd want you to do whatever you're doing better until a point where they can find a replacement. Whereas you, from a personal point, you want to do a lot of different things so that you can ultimately be the boss and you can do. So how do you manage that? How do you invest in one versus the other?
So this is what I used to tell our folks. The challenge in a large corporation is the HR system is designed to promote you vertically based on your skill set. Engineering, finance, marketing, whatever, based on your skill set. But until you get to management, then you want to see breadth. So a challenge for each individual who wants to go into management and executive ranks is how do you get the breadth in an environment that is designed for vertical promotion. So you do that by taking special assignment, doing part, I go work like when I was younger, I had a time when I was a little bored. So I talked to my boss, I said, I really have been working with contracts organization and I don't know enough, so I've got some slow time, can I go work with them? They said, great. So I've spent 4 weeks working with them. I learned a lot about contracts that I didn't know before. So that's, it is up to each individual to figure out how to get the bread as you're going up in your career. Thank you all, much appreciated.
And I'm sure that one of the things that a lot of people in the audience, can relate to is if they had a manager like you, a senior manager, an executive like you, they could have learned a lot, I think. So one follow-up question, is there a blog or website or something, or a book you've written that people can use to continue this conversation and learning?
I'm on page 79 of my book called Speak, Ask, and Raise Your Hand.
Okay, well,
Wish me luck.
Yes, so we look forward to that book. And finally, I normally do this as kind of a quick feedback to our speakers. If I might ask, one word feedback. What did you learn from the session? Just one word to describe the session and what you took away.
Principles.
Principle.
This is based on principles, you just apply it.
Great. Any other?
Situation.
Just one word feedback. Experience. Okay? Anything else?
Inspiring.
Inspiring. Any others?
Ambitious.
Ambitious.
Who's going to say that?
I think always look for even opportunities, even seemingly small, but try to get a lot of more from that. Like
Be on the lookout for opportunity. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
maybe the 1 minute opportunity.
Okay.
will be good.
great.
Conversational.
Conversation. So
There is feedback, take feedback.
feedback. So, let me again thank you so much for the
My
wisdom
pleasure.
you imparted, and we hope to see you again.